Welcome to Policy and Governance Perspectives, the official podcast of the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Join Dr. David Ramadan and Schar School experts as they engage in thought-provoking conversations with elected officials, policymakers, and thought leaders. Listen for in-depth discussions on policies, politics, governance, and career pathways, all designed to elevate your perspectives and expand your mind.
Welcome to another episode of Policy and Governance Perspectives, the official podcast of the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. I'm your host, David Ramadan. I'm very excited about today's guest. He wears a lot of hats: businessman, former lieutenant governor of Virginia, former U.S. ambassador, and now a senior member of Congress representing Northern Virginia. He's also, I should note, a George Mason student, and we'll talk about that. Congressman Don Beyer is pursuing a graduate study in computer science, but there was a requirement to do before he starts his master's. He'll tell us about it in machine learning here at George Mason, while serving in the House of Representatives, where he is at the center of major conversations on technology, artificial intelligence, and energy policy, including leadership roles on AI legislation and fusion energy. Congressman, welcome.
David, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Always great to have you. All right, let's dive right in. Let's start with your story and the Mason connection. Tell us a little bit, tell our listeners, how does their congressman end up at Mason at this time and age? But where does the story begin? How does your career begin? How did it take you to Congress? And why back in the classroom now?
Well, I'm 75, so that's a long story. Too boring for a podcast. I do remember, 45-ish years ago, one of my wonderful sisters, she and I worked together in the family business in the selling cars, and her husband was a George Mason University law student, and we were sweating bullets for 2 years to see whether the law school would be accredited. It was the old Cannes shopping center in Arlington, with the escalators and everything.
Department store escalators. I remember those.
Yeah, and then some years later, I got to be on the 123 Club, which is this little group of business leaders that President George Mason, really the one who took George Mason up from no one ever heard of it to a nationally ranked research university.
Agreed.
And George was this character larger than life, and so it was just inevitable that I would fall in love with George Mason as a very important part of our community. And of course, when we brag and say Amazon HQ2 decided to locate in Northern Virginia, not because we offered them more money, because we didn't offer them any money until they created jobs. We didn't bribe them to come here. Instead, we said, look at the workforce, look at the young men and women studying at places like George Mason that you can build on for the future. They came for the young people that we have here. And the young people are here because we have George Mason.
Agreed. So why computer science now? And tell us, what are you doing? You have your final, we're recording today on December 8th. This will play in a couple of weeks. But you told me before we started, you have your final exam coming up in a couple of days in an undergraduate class. So what happened there?
Well, David, I was always sort of a math nerd in high school and studied economics and physics in college. But then I ended up being a car dealer, which was a lot of math, although most of the math you need to sell cars you knew in fourth grade. But it was fun. But I always maintained that interest in, puzzles and physics. And maybe 10 years ago, I became modestly aware that there were breakthroughs in mathematics that enabled us to take large amounts of data and see the connections within them. What they used to call deep mining. And so I tried to take an online course, Coursera from Stanford, on artificial intelligence, which was fascinating. But very quickly, I realized that I didn't know how to code. I didn't know Python or C or anything. And also had never taken linear algebra. And it was quickly over my head. So I just set it aside. But on a visit 4 years ago to George Mason to look at one of the new, very cool labs in Arlington, I just drop the question, do you think I could study here? And they look skeptical, but I applied anyway. And so I'm just finishing my 10th undergraduate course. Sadly, I needed 10 undergraduate courses just to be semi-qualified to enter the graduate program. But I'll start my first one in January, 531, I think. Computer science 531. I'm
That
looking
is
forward to it now.
And that is awesome. Going back to school, if I may say, at your age, and going for undergraduate courses so that you can qualify for your graduate degree in informatics is very, very commendable and respectable. So thank you for doing that. But let's explain to the listeners the why on all of this, right? You mentioned talking about AI and the need for that. As a legislator, and I can relate because I legislated on a state level, and people would come to us, to you now, with all kind of things, right? And I would tell people all the time, said, look, I understand three things in life. I understand business, I understand politics, right? And I understand higher education. Anything else, you'll have to educate me. When they came and talked to me about agriculture, I had no idea. I had to go to a colleague to learn about agriculture and the difference between a dairy cow and a meat cow, right? So people come to you with all kind of things, but ultimately we are either voting on bills or writing bills, writing laws that affect everybody's life. You got interested in AI. You in Congress are about to start legislating AI, and that's what really prompted this, so that you will be an informed and smart legislator, not somebody who is just writing what others give them. Tell us a little more about that, if you don't mind.
Well, one of the things, David, I realized fairly quickly is that there are very few people with a science background in Congress. You think about it, there's people that are drawn to political science and to a lesser extent economics, but to governance. I think there's two PhD scientists out of 535 members of the House and
Wow,
Senate.
only two.
Yeah, and so with not my natural skills, but my natural interest in it, I thought it would be really fun to do this. And so now I get to co-chair the Artificial Intelligence Caucus, and I get to serve on the 24-person Special Task Force on AI last year. And I get to be in the middle of the conversation on something that's extraordinarily important for the future of our country and our planet.
I'll send you the article. The former president of George Mason, my good friend Angel Cabrera, who is now teaching or a president of Georgia Tech, his alma mater, they stole him from us, just wrote an article a couple of days ago about teaching in higher ed with AI. And he basically made the statement that AI has become smarter than any of us. And yes, we can throw in tantrums and say we don't want to teach with AI or teach AI and keep it out of the classroom. But that is basically, he didn't say dumb. I'm saying it's dumb to do so. And he came down to few things such as what should we be doing? 1, teach AI. 2, teach with AI. 3, work with AI, and 4, make AI help people, or I may have rephrased his points here. But AI is part and parcel of everything we do going forward in our era and our age. Do you agree?
I very much do agree. And people use it in so many different ways. I've found, in my computer science classes, we're absolutely not allowed to use AI for our projects, for our homework, things like that. However, and that's absolutely the way it should be. However, I find whenever I have a question, I don't understand something in the textbook or from the lectures, I can go back to Claude and say, why does this make sense? And get really nice explanations. It's become a very, like a tutor in a ways that helps develop the understanding they actually need to do the work on your own.
Absolutely. It's a good tutor for students. I describe it in my work and everyday work as a set, not just one, a set of very smart assistants, whether it's teacher's aides for my graduate classes that I teach or for day-to-day life. And I have a set of very smart graduate level assistants that I give them a task, and instead of taking them days to come back with answers, it takes them seconds or minutes to come back with answers.
I'm getting so much, my team down on the hill, they're all very good writers, but I'm amazed how quickly they turn out 4 and 5 page documents for me to read.
ChatGPT is the best $20 a month. Good for them. All right, enough on AI for now. If you don't mind, actually, let me ask you a question on being a student before we jump to. I want to talk a little bit about energy, and you've been on the forefront of that. How does being a student again influence the way you think about policy and legislation today on emerging technologies or anything else? Did that change a little bit of your perspective?
Yes, although in subtle ways. For example, being surrounded by the young people at George Mason, and yeah, I've been taking undergraduate classes, so probably the top age has been 22, lots of 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And, as a 75-year-old, you don't get around a chance to hang around people that age much. But I've been very impressed. Serious, they work hard, they ask good questions, they're warm, it's an incredibly diverse campus. Makes me very optimistic about the future. That if this is who we're turning out, this is good. This is really good for America. And what comes through with that is the kindness. No one has to be nice to me. This old guy and overdressed for class, but they've been good. The other thing that's really been helpful is the sense that artificial intelligence is changing in dramatic ways the way our workforce is going to work. As you know, David, 9% of recent college graduates, 1 and 2 years out, are unemployed right now. One of the highest times it's been in history. That the first wave of AI replacing jobs is in entry-level jobs, whether it's in a law firm or accounting firm or just businesses of all kinds, including coders. And so we have an enormous responsibility, those of us in public service like you and me, to try to figure out how do we manage the job displacement that AI is going to bring. I don't have any easy answers, but I do know it's a very serious question.
The common saying nowadays is that AI is not going to replace your job, but somebody who knows how to use AI is going to replace your job.
Yeah.
And I really believe in that. All right, let's jump.
Work too of people who, instead of just being coders, they're now they've jumped up a level or 2 or 3 to be managing the processes that do the coding. And I have my middle daughter was a coder for 10 years, made a lot of money, but ultimately quit to paint because she was bored. The whole code monkey thing, at a certain point, sitting at a desk by yourself and doing if and while loops gets boring, and you need something more fulfilling. And AI perhaps can take you to a more fulfilling role.
True. How good is her paintings?
Well, I'm her father, so I think
Oh, that's great. All right, let's pivot to energy if you don't mind, especially fusion. You've been out front on this. Why are we focused on fusion energy? Even start by explaining fusion energy for our listeners, because I had the privilege of hearing this from you in my class when you come and speak to my graduate class last year. I'll invite you again in January or February when you have time. But please explain to the average listener, what do we talk about and why fusion energy?
So fusion energy is the energy of the sun and all the stars. The first energy force is gravity, and after that, fusion. So basically, all of the energy sources we have in our life, think coal or wood or solar or any of that stuff, all comes from the power of the sun, which comes from fusion. And fusion energy at the most basic is just the simplest atom, hydrogen, which is typically, 1 proton and 1 electron. And if you hammer 2 of them together to form a second element, helium, with 2 protons and 2 electrons, it throws off an enormous amount of energy. I think I read the other day that 1 kilogram of fusion energy, that hydrogen throws off something like 10,000 times as much energy as a kilogram of coal.
Wow.
It was way, way more. The only dilemma is that you sort of need to be on the sun to make it happen. We discovered it in 1930s, and we've only in the last couple of years, so we actually created a fusion reaction on Earth that generated more power than it took to create it. But right now, there are 28 U.S. companies, many more around the world, trying to be the first to actually do fusion on Earth. When that happens, we have an energy source whose the raw material is seawater. There's no radioactive waste. The only thing it sets off is power and a little bit of helium, which is an inert gas. You can't smell it, you can't see it. We actually need it for medical purposes. So we could basically, it's one of those deals where we could kill a lot of birds with one stone. Climate change, is caused by dumping all this carbon fuel into the atmosphere. We'd no longer need to do very much of that. We'd use carbon for things like plastics and stuff, but not much. And then poverty, the great source of poverty is the lack of energy anywhere in the world, sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the like. So all of a sudden, if you have basically a very, very, very low-cost energy source, you could take the last 2 billion people still living in abject poverty and lift them into the middle class. It would transform mankind.
Where are we in reality on that, in actual production? I know
How
there's
soon?
something coming in Virginia
Yeah.
line, and where are we in
Well,
number of years?
Virginia's probably 2030, so that's fast. It's almost 2026. They're gonna break ground on the first ever fusion energy power plant in the world history in Chesterfield County, Virginia, next year,
Yep.
2026. Our new governor will be there to toss some dirt. And then there are plants going up in Seattle by 2028 and Southern California in 2031. It will probably be, David, 10 years from now, 2035, before we see meaningful fusion energy on the grid across the country. But that goes pretty fast. And then we have an opportunity to, with unlimited energy, to fix a lot of other problems.
Are your colleagues in Congress on board with fusion energy?
Yes, they are. Our little fusion caucus has about 112 members in it right now.
Great number.
The only reason it doesn't have 400 is just time limitation to get people to sign up. The big challenge, though, is that we've not been able to put a lot of federal money behind this.
Mhm.
We don't want to fund individual factories. We're not doing any of that. But there's a very interesting and important plan to put $10 billion into it to solve science problems, engineering problems that will benefit anybody working on fusion anywhere in the world. And this is what government should do, sort of the basic research, and let other people apply it and figure out how to put it on the electrical grid.
Thank you. For students and young professionals who care about climate and energy, how should they think about fusion alongside renewables and other technologies?
Well,
What can students at Mason do to help with that?
yeah, in the short and middle run, we need all of the above to handle all the energy demands. There's surging needs for 20 years, David. From like 2000 to 2020, there's very little electricity growth and demand globally, and it's surged again as we're back to like the 1930s. We need a lot more. Some of that's data centers, but a lot of it's air conditioning in much of the world. Electric vehicles, China leads us in electrification of their economy, but we're following little by little. So from a student perspective, we need to continue to push for solar and wind and geothermal, and continue to shut down the coal plants that are existing. No one's building new coal plants. All the existing coal plants have a deadline an internal deadline to get rid of it. But my basic news for the students is to be optimistic. So many people have been really pessimistic about what's happening in climate change. And yes, it's real. We're not hitting the 2.5 degrees centigrade that we hope to, but there is hope down the road.
You said all the above, and if I may push back for a second, you also said we need to continue to shut down all the coal. Even the gas and energy that we're buying in Virginia from West Virginia are being bought from coal production. So don't those two clash, all the above and shut down the coal at this time?
Yeah, it's timing issues, David. We're buying the energy. Dominion's buying, coal generated power because it needs the power. And that will happen for the short term. I think there have been many, many coal plants that have been shut down over the years. One of the things that the current president's trying to do is extend the life of ones that are still running, basically in order till we catch up. So we're going through a transition period. Fusion energy is not here yet. And we were growing incredibly quickly in solar and wind, although, again, Donald Trump has tried to slow that down a lot. Ironically, I had a meeting with the Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, who pointed out that the cost per kilowatt hour for solar and wind is so low that fossil fuels can't compete.
Oh,
And so
wow.
they're not getting the new investment in fracking and stuff unless they can make solar and wind more expensive, which is one of the reasons why Trump is trying to shut them down.
Interesting. All right. Last question on energy, also back to fusion. What is a realistic win on fusion in 20 years from now? Are we producing most of our energy out of fusion, or is it something else?
20 years from now, 2045, I think we could have this. The back of the envelope is we need 10,000 fewer power plants across the entire world to power all the world with fusion. If by 2045 we have a couple of thousand here in the United States, we will be in a very, very different place. First of all, we just look at how different the environment changed in 2020 and 2021 when we stopped driving cars because of COVID. The air is a lot cleaner. The particle stuff went way down. Climate change slowed. We can have that kind of impact. And David, there's one other subtlety, which is really exciting, is before the Inflation Reduction Act, there were only two companies in the world that were doing carbon capture, taking all the carbon we've dumped into the environment in the last 400 years out of the air. One from Switzerland, one from Canada. Now there are 200 startups just in the United States. The dilemma is to take carbon out of the air, you have to burn carbon to energize it. And so basically one-for-one swap. One, we don't need to burn carbon when we can use fusion to take the carbon out of the air. We can literally reverse climate change. And we'll have to do it carefully because it took 400 years to get there. We don't want to reverse it all in 5 or 10. We don't know what the consequence of that would be.
Are our allies and adversaries overseas working on fusion as well? Are on board?
China, sadly, is significantly ahead of us.
Hmm.
They are spending lots more money. China is treating it as we did the Manhattan Project,
Okay.
as a national emergency. We are not. We're reliant on the private sector so far. Part of my job and the job of our Fusion Caucus is to get that sense of pressure and urgency to this administration and the ones to come.
I like to see things always cup half full. But that is good news for the environment. I mean, China is one of the biggest abusers. If they start producing fusion, that is good for the environment.
And China right now, again, is eating our lunch. They're selling solar and wind to countries all around the world. Tom Friedman wrote that wonderful book 20 years ago called The Earth is Flat, in which he said the country that dominates green energy will dominate the 21st century. And China read the book, and we didn't.
Interesting. All right, let's put this together now related to constituents, to our brethren, to our, your constituents, our neighbors. When you're working on the intersection of technology, governance, public trust, faith in institutions, which we're seeing quite a bit of lack of nowadays, how are you talking to constituents, and what are you hearing about the hype versus the fear?
Well, let me break that into two pieces. There's number one, the fear about AI. And David, as you know, the areas we represent, you and I, they're the most educated congressional district in the country. The income levels are pretty high compared to the rest. And there's much more anxiety about AI than excitement. The excitement tends to be around all the medical breakthroughs, which are happening on a day-to-day basis. But the fears are energy or job displacement, which we talked about, but also privacy issues. You talk about anonymized data. Nothing's going to be anonymous. You put it in ChatGPT, they'll be able to figure out who David Ramadan is pretty quickly. Even to the standpoint of what does it mean in terms of people being able to generate smallpox on a desktop DNA machine or figure out how to build dangerous weapons. And then the existential risk. We've never lived with anything smarter than we are. What happens when there are entities, whether they have consciousness or not, that are smarter than we are? And the computer scientists come back to what they call the alignment problem. How do we know that artificial superintelligence will want the same things that we want? And if they don't, if you read Jared Diamond's wonderful Guns, Germs, and Steel, the first thing we did when we got to a new continent is kill all the big animals. Anything that would compete with us. Well, what's to keep artificial superintelligence deciding it doesn't need us?
You're scaring them more than assuring
There's a
them.
risk that we really have to think.
You're scaring our listeners more than assuring them at this point.
There's a new book out by Udowski and Soares, which I recommend to everyone, called "If Anyone Builds It, Everybody Dies." It's not a long read, but it's a scary read and an important read.
I'll have to pick that up for the Christmas break.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's not good Christmas reading, but as Nate Soares, one of the authors, said, even the most enthusiastic AI leaders say, well, there might only be a 10% chance of it ending civilization. But 10% chance,
It's a high chance.
that's very real. I mean, we can't ignore that. So, on the other hand, you talked about trust in institutions. Our country, I don't think, is maybe the Civil War is as divided as it is now, but it's very, very divided. And I'm desperate for a president who wants to heal us and bring us together. That's not who we have right now. And my priority for the next president will be someone who decides to help figure out what our American identity is overall and bring us together. Remind us that we all good people who love each other and love our communities and love our country, and we need to be working together rather than fighting one against the other.
Amen to that. That is music to my ears. This immigrant still believes in the greatness of this country. My saying recently has been, every day is a great day in this great country, even the bad days. And we've had a lot of bad days, but it's still the greatest country on earth. It's still the city shining on the hill, despite all of our problems. And I'm with you. I'm yearning for a president that brings us together. Do you have any fear for democracy related to AI? Not on the political side. We all fear for democracy from what we're seeing today in our democratic process or challenges to our democratic process. But when we take it back to AI and technology, that intersection and all the misinformation that's causing, that some of it is causing out there, do you fear for democracy from that point of view?
I do fear, mostly because this administration, I know this is not intended to be a political conversation, but so many traditions, rules, laws, constitutional provisions have been ignored or broken. And that's very, very concerning. I don't get too gloomy about it, though, because I know so many, many, many people across the political spectrum, hard Republicans who would never vote for me, who are nevertheless really good people, who love their country, love their families, would help me if I was ever in trouble. I believe in who we are as a people. And certainly there are bad people who do bad things, but that's always been true and always will be true. But I think we will come around to putting the right people in place for the enormous crises that we face.
All right, let's wrap this up with some advice from your decades of experience to our students. There are a lot of cynicism and burnout among students and student leaders. What would you say to a Mason student who are skeptical about getting into politics or public service?
Oh, just for all those that are skeptical and cynical, the first thing to do is go be part of a campaign, a Democratic campaign, a Republican campaign, anything like that. That wakes you up right away because you see right away that the people that are involved in it, again, regardless of ideology, are there because they want to make a difference. They want to make things better for people. Different ideas of how best to do that, as we see on the fights over healthcare. But there's no reason to be cynical. And it's easy to be cynical when you're not involved. When you get involved in it, you get caught up in the importance of it. I end up with about 16 interns per year, often from George Mason. And I promise you, when they leave after 13 weeks in our office, they become very excited about the political system.
Excellent advice. And what's one leadership lesson from your career that you think every student leader should hear?
Oh, let me give you two. The old James McGregor Burns definition of leadership is vision and agenda. You have to have a vision. You have to be able to decide what's the world like, or what's your leadership like, and then who's going to do what by when. What's the agenda to get there? The other throwaway advice I found is that the most important part of leadership is raising your hand. That's so you end up in leadership positions again and again just because you're the one that steps forward and says, I'll do that, however humble. And the people and David, I know, look, all the leaders that we've been around our lives, they're the ones who stepped forward and said, I'll take that on. If you don't
Servant
step
leader.
forward, you're never going to be a leader.
Absolutely. Especially if they're coming to it from a servant point of view, servant leadership.
Servant leadership is the actual heart of it. It's never about you. It's about those that you're taking care of.
And if you were to leave Mason students with one advice about combining tech literacy and public service, what would that be?
Well, I think they go together. I mean, there's not enough tech literacy in public service. So anyone who can bring that technical background to public service becomes a really valuable person. I had a young man run against me in the election 2 years ago. I was really impressed with him because he wanted he was I guess a very good computer program person in his mid-30s, and he wanted to bring his skill set to solve a lot of the bureaucratic problems in government. Congress was probably not the right place to do that, but his desire was real and important.
Any final thoughts, Congressman?
Thrilled to be part of this community. Thank you for teaching there. I'm very optimistic about America's future and specifically Virginia's future because we had George Mason.
Congressman Beyer, thank you for joining us and for bringing your perspective from Capitol Hill and your experience as a fellow Mason student into the conversation. You are one of my favorite speakers. I enjoy having you in my graduate class every year, and I'll look forward to having you again in January, February to my graduate seminar. For our listeners, there's a reason why I enjoy and learn from Congressman Beyer all the time. I'm sure it was evident to you, as I say to his face and behind his back all the time. He's one of the most intellectual members of Congress. If you'd like to learn more about Congressman Beyer's work on AI, energy, and public policy, we'll include a link in the show's notes where you can reach him and reach his office. You can find all episodes of Policy and Governance Perspectives at char.gmu.edu/podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. We're syndicated on all the major programs. I am Dr. David Ramadan. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected to the work happening here at George Mason University. Have wonderful holidays.
That brings us to the end of another insightful episode of Policy and Governance Perspectives. We truly appreciate you joining us for these important discussions featuring voices from across the Schar School. For more information and to explore our archive of past episodes, please visit char.gmu.edu/podcast. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to sharing more with you next time.